We are, in one way or the other, going to be addressing and solving for and paying for every person within our community in one way or the other. For me, when I look at the evidence behind and the data behind how we currently approach statewide in Arkansas and even in our region, individuals struggling with poverty or some of these other unmet needs, there's just tremendous upward opportunity in how we meet folks. People, in poverty, unfortunately, have a higher propensity to end up in the criminal legal system, to face arrest, to face mounting fines and fees that they can't pay within our court system. And so there's just a continuing cycle of part of our population that struggles to have full opportunity within our communities.
You're listening to The Underview, an exploration in the shaping of our place. My name is Mike Rush, and throughout our discussions with leaders shaping this community, we've learned a lot about how the region's housing policies impact daily life. Housing policies can create a domino effect, influencing many other aspects of our community. One of those specific areas is the intersection of housing policy, poverty, and the criminal justice system. I want to understand how the connections between land, housing, wealth, and poverty relate to the likelihood of incarceration, because the facts of who is arrested in both Benton and Washington counties reveal some things that I think are problematic. For example, there are 2 zip codes in Washington County, one in South Fayetteville and one in East Springdale, and they contain less than 5% of the population of Washington County. And both of those areas have the lowest median and average household income of their cities. However, when you look at the statistics of the people arrested in Washington County over the past year, these 2 zip codes represent 40% of the people arrested in the county. Just for clarity, 5% of the population, lowest income areas, 40% of the arrests. Why? What is it about these areas that make the likelihood of arrest almost 8 times higher? Maybe we are asking the wrong questions. And so today I have the opportunity and privilege to sit with Sarah Moore. Sarah is the executive director of the Arkansas Justice Reform Coalition and a member of the Fayetteville City Council. In her roles, Sarah works to advocate for better, safer, and more cost-effective solutions for those that are most likely to face arrest, incarceration, and prolonged detention simply because they cannot afford bail. There's an adage that a community will fill every jail bed that it has available, meaning if we build more jails, those jails will be filled. And I think that raises the question of whether our jail systems are supposed to work that way. Councilmember Moore's focus is on building communities and not jails. And I believe we have much to learn about how this approach could work here in Northwest Arkansas. And one final comment. In June, the Arkansas Justice Reform Coalition filed a federal lawsuit against Washington County for the ineligible use of federal ARPA funds, meaning the COVID relief funds. These funds were designated by Washington County to expand the jail capacity. We do not discuss this pending lawsuit, but this is a real example of how this topic is absolutely relevant right now to how we work to shape our community. All right, let's roll up our sleeves and get started. We've got a lot to cover today.
Councilmember Moore, thank you for sitting with me this morning. Thanks for sharing the table. It's great to sit with you, and thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
I'd love to start with your story, if you would.
I am a lifelong Arkansan. I was actually born in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, but I moved to Northwest Arkansas and went to the university in the late 90s. For our region, I like to say I was a part of the problem, so I needed to be a part of the solution. So many individuals, move to our area, find that it becomes home and they stay. But I was the product, as so many Arkansans are, of a single parent household. My mother struggled. She had a full ride originally to go to college and deferred that and actually ended up having myself and a couple of siblings and really struggled in South Arkansas. And so I'm really the product and saw firsthand the grit and determination of my mother who then married later and had additional siblings. So the oldest of 5 children, we always, rolled in a really large group, and being community focused was important because there was always a democratic process. There was always negotiations that had to go on in that household. And, I ended up going to the University of Arkansas, as I stated. I studied marketing management. And really, I did that because I really wanted to make sure that I really had options and choices. I really was tired, like so many in her state, of struggling, and wanted to make sure that I had as much choice and determination over my person, and knew that an education was incredibly important. My mom did instill that and said all the time about going to college, and feel really strongly that, folks have an opportunity, whether it's college education or it's trade, that there is some pathway forward that gives individuals the opportunity for upward mobility in our communities. But I went to the university. I was able to end up at a Fortune 500 company. I did a lot of different things: category management, trade marketing. I got into sales, and I eventually exited that role as a national account executive, doing a line of about $40 million. And I left because some things happened within my own family dynamic. I was lucky enough, been with my partner for over 20 years, but we lost our first child. And that's, a huge catalyst in your life. That's a time that you pause and you really reassess. And a year later, we had our daughter, Salem, and we made that choice together as a family. We were lucky enough to have that ability to make the choice that I stayed home. And so really all that energy that I poured out into the world as I was at the university and I was in a corporate environment, I poured that into my child. And that was very beneficial to her development. Our family was able to have a strong structure. As she went into public schools and as we had our second child, it became abundantly clear that not everyone has that opportunity. And so I ended up in some advocacy spaces, both because of that, but also because in my family, we had been walking the path of navigating serious mental health conditions. And so often we're struggling to find appropriate resources, and oftentimes being criminalized or struggling and having diminishing health conditions. And so I did a lot of advocacy work starting in 2016. In 2019, I ended up going to a Washington County Quorum Court meeting in January 2019 because the Crisis Stabilization Unit was a year behind an opening in Washington County. I had stayed up days sometimes with a family member trying to get mental health assistance, worried, having life-saving measures for that person. And so when I showed up, I was dumbfounded that there was mention of doubling the size of the Washington County Detention Center without any sophisticated analysis. There wasn't a feasibility study. It was just something that was being discussed, just like you would discuss sweeping the floors or taking out the trash. And so that turned into an effort with other community members as we had a discussion about what does our community need? How do we meet unmet needs? We ended up forming together the Arkansas Justice Reform Coalition, and our mission is to end mass incarceration, focused on building our communities, investing in our communities. And that winding road, I didn't know what my path was when I started from college on. It's just kind of been something that one thing has kind of led to the other. And I think I've ended up in the places I needed to be. So through the work that I've done in the nonprofit space and in talking in community, I was approached about a lot of the work that we do is talking to elected officials and presenting data and doing analysis and saying what could be possible, visioning. And so I ran for the Fayetteville City Council because I love this city. I love Arkansas, but I really passionately love Fayetteville. I want to make sure that Fayetteville is available, achievable, attainable for everyone. And when I look at my 2 girls and they say, I want to be these different things that maybe don't have a lot of income, I want to make sure that they can choose to be in Fayetteville and that Fayetteville is a place for them. I'm lucky to be a part of this city and to have such a responsibility. And I do take it very seriously that the choices that we're making right now are incredibly important for going forward in our community.
I appreciate your vulnerability and just transparency and kind of what brought you to this. It sounds obviously a very personal story. And so, yeah, I'd love to understand, what does this place mean to you? What does Fayetteville mean to you when I say that?
I mean, for myself, and as I've talked to other community members, I think I share this, that Fayetteville is a beacon of hope. Oftentimes, Fayetteville is the leader on so many topics. I know that Fayetteville stands firmly on taking the leading edge on different subjects, on different areas of interest in our communities. And really, I have people come and say, this is giving us hope in Arkansas, when sometimes policies or legislation are feeling like across the state that they're leaving parts of our communities out.
In your journey with Arkansas justice reform, what was the moment where you said, this is something we have to do? We don't have another choice but to move forward in this space.
For me, it's such a personal journey. I think that individuals who don't think that they're impacted by systems that create harm, if they really look and they kind of peel back the layers, would be either surprised or maybe would recognize that, unfortunately, while sometimes our systems in place can have lots of well-meaning, can hope to be impactful in a positive way, there are so many individuals that are being negatively impacted, many of our families, by things like arrest and jailing of individuals for being unhoused, for needing mental health help and assistance, for needing addiction and recovery services. When you talk to individuals that end up in some of these situations, oftentimes they maybe have tried to reach out for help and not been able to get it. And for me, my entry point and the reason why, how I've said that this is my work for the rest of my life, is because I have those people I love in Arkansas who are worth something, even though they don't move through the world in the same way that I do. They're neurodivergent. They have mental health conditions. They're working to navigate that rocky road of recovery and navigating addiction. All of those individuals are more than their worst choice. And not only do I think that they have worth, I know that when we pour into them in a way that meets them where they're at, that heals them, that's restorative, that addresses the trauma, we keep families strong and together in Arkansas. And I know how important in Arkansas our family structures are. I know how important we care about those in our community. And it benefits us financially. It benefits us to have these stronger communities. It benefits our economies when people are able to be at work together and are not, missing employment opportunities. For me, again, it's incredibly personal, but also too, I think that Arkansas is definitely a stronger place whenever we really focus on meeting all of those needs that historically haven't always been met.
It seems to me like when you talk about this, you're coming from a different perspective sometimes than we hear maybe in our broader culture when we talk about issues of justice, or we talk about issues of criminalization of behavior or law enforcement. How should we be thinking about this as a community when we think about what does it look like to build a community, and one that obviously is just, one that is pursuing what it looks like to give people freedoms, but also live in this space where there are laws and there are community norms and social contracts, if you will, about how we live in this place. I think as I listen to you, it's a very different perspective than sometimes I think is portrayed both in the media or maybe our understanding as a general culture. So I'm just kind of curious, how would you reframe that for people?
No, yeah. I've had this conversation a lot across the state and across the nation, not saying, like you said, the social norms, keeping individuals accountable. It's how do we keep our community accountable? And I think at all levels, everyone should be accountable. We had elected officials like myself that have said that we're going to do this X, Y, and Z, and we need to be measured and held accountable. Community members as well. We need to make sure that we're able to maintain public safety, and we should be held accountable. It really is in how we do that, how we approach it. There are so many different ways that communities across the country are looking at and addressing their communities. And so I think what's great is that we've been able to do some of those today, say social workers that are implemented in the Fayetteville Police Department to try to address and understand that there are individuals in our community that do have these unmet needs. But there are ways to go even further. I know myself and others probably would say we aren't necessarily wanting to be taxed any further, right? So many of us are feeling that pinch, inflation, and our wages have not kept up. And so being sensitive to the fact that the investments have been made by taxpayers, we have to really look and see with the evidence and metrics, do we like the outcomes that we're getting with the policies and the measures we have in place? And if we don't, we have to be ready to make those shifts and to adjust. Some things we will test and we may not like the outcome and we may have to readjust. Other things are going to be no-brainers. They're going to be things that are happening other places, maybe have been happening since the 90s. And we have very compelling evidence about the increase of community safety, the increase of keeping people together in family units. And so those are things that don't take a lot of risk for us to look into. And I am saying, let's look at this differently. What I look at when I envision Arkansas is finding a way that everyone can be met in the way that they need to within our communities. And I want to say and identify that, yes, that's a difficult path. I am asking us to do something that's hard, but I think that we can do that. I am very encouraged. I was so lucky to get to meet over 3,000 neighbors when I ran for office in Fayetteville. And it really reinstilled in me that commitment that people have to one another, that they want to see solutions that move us all forward. And so for that reason, I think that's why it's so incredibly important that we paint this picture of what can be for our communities.
When you think of the roots of maybe some of the problems that we're dealing with, are they roots based in historically where we come from? Is it decisions we've made lately, or are these decisions that are being made now? And my assumption would be you would say all of those, but help us kind of place where we're at. We look at our region as growing and vibrant and people are coming here and our quality of life is described as really good. That may not be true for everyone that lives here, and that there are some roots of where these issues come from. I'm curious how you view that as you move forward about making policy or decisions or advocating to kind of help keep us on a path that's going to move us forward.
I mean, I do agree. It is all of the things. You know, Arkansas has been known historically as a very impoverished state. More than half of the jobs available in the state of Arkansas make $15 or less per hour. And we often have that mentality because we're gritty and determined in Arkansas to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. And so I think there are some kind of historical and kind of really deeply entrenched things within our communities that we have to work on. But there are emerging things too. We have in our region, especially, you know, we have so many new individuals coming every day into our communities that we're working to welcome, and they bring totally different lived experiences and perspectives. And so there's a balancing act too, as we go forward, of what our identity has been over time, the ways that we've addressed things over time, and then this kind of shift or this, you know, addressing of this vibrancy that new individuals are bringing to our community and how that helps to shape the future of what we look like in our region and what that looks like for Arkansas. We are becoming much more diverse in people's backgrounds and their lived experience in the countries people come from. And so for me, it's exciting, but I also see it as a challenge because I think it, again, if you go back and you center ourselves on what are our goals, if we want everyone to thrive in community, and you look at some of the metrics, not all of us are thriving. And I think it's so important to be very realistic and to look transparently, just head on at what the situation is, because we can't fully address something unless we identify and name it. And just because we name it too, I really want to caution folks that sometimes I hear the word criticism. We should be our own worst critics, right? We should, if we love something, we should probably be as critical as possible to make it the best that we can. And so I hope that we all will use a very critical eye, that even though our region oftentimes is a model across the state, comparatively, we've had a lot of struggles in Arkansas. And so I think that this region has the opportunity to really think about, especially, are we enveloping all these newcomers? Are we finding a way for individuals who've struggled, who've been a fabric of Arkansas and of our region? How do they stay here, and where is their place? And this is all along the lines of things like our housing and housing policies, on food insecurity, on meeting childcare needs, and getting wage and economic mobility growth within our communities. So it's all intertwined. And yes, there's been historic, but there are more recent policy and legislative actions too, both in our region and across the state, that have been taking place or are taking shape right now that will have a lot of impact going forward.
Can you explain that a little bit more, maybe?
For instance, one of the things that we recently had happen in the city of Fayetteville was, over many months, probably started last summer, there were community conversations that were really spearheaded by local community members. They invited elected officials to come participate, and the public at large. But our community has really told us that we are at a tremendous pinch point on housing, and we really need some innovative solutions. And so over the matter of several sessions where there were community workshops, there was funneled up a piece of legislation that was brought forward to the city council members in the resolution that stated that we were having a housing crisis in Fayetteville. And some may say, of course, we have a housing crisis across the nation. But this centers and goes back to something I spoke about earlier, is that you have to really identify and name what the opportunity is. And then that allows us to be able to center what the possible solutions are, what policy work needs to happen, and ultimately where our budget goes. Because, where we spend our money is where we see priority, is where we see the focus that needs to happen.
This declaration of a housing crisis, what does that communicate to people when for the city council to come together and to say, yes, we are going to declare this? What's the significance of that?
The significance for me, I can't speak for everyone on council who voted, but the significance of declaring the housing crisis was a way for me to say, I see you, I hear you, we have work to do, and I am accepting that challenge at hand. I, was elected to listen, to hear you, and then to act. And so it was a commitment around identifying the work that's at hand, but ultimately at the end of the day too, to give hope. It's very hard to walk through our lives and to not have this hopefulness. And so I think, often individuals might express to me, or you might see it, on social media, feeling like they're just not listened to or dismissed or can't be a part of a conversation. This was a way to very publicly show and state that, we saw the residents that have told us that they're struggling, and that we are ready to really attack that and to work to go forward.
Obviously, Fayetteville is maybe not unique in this issue. Are there unique parts to Fayetteville when it comes to this housing conversation, or do you feel like this is something that, as a region, decisions made elsewhere are impacting what's happening in Fayetteville? How do you view this regional approach, yet this city declared crisis, right?
Yeah, no, we absolutely, across our region, the decisions that each of us are making on land use policies, zoning practices, what we do with roadways and transportation investments, all have direct impacts on one another. And there's a tremendous opportunity for us to work much more strategically and comprehensively across the region. I'm encouraged by some of the early conversations, but do think we need to do more. Being someone that sits at the Fayetteville City Council, we have to make sure that we're doing our part and then some when we can to show leadership. And my family has a motto that we kind of live by, if not me, then who? And so I think that if we see that there's a gap in regard to addressing the needs for housing, I think that Fayetteville is a perfect place to be able to try to lead in that. But definitely, as much as Fayetteville tries to look at this time and put forward the possibility of different, we've got a 71 corridor rezone that we're looking at. I think it touches about 500 parcels. And so that will have, sweeping changes for the landscape of what that looks like in our community. And that's, an incredible project that's going underway. However, that doesn't necessarily stop the widespread sprawl that goes out into our neighboring communities when folks are looking for more affordable land, possibly lower housing cost. And so working in concert across the region about how we really think about those overall costs, how we keep our communities tighter together and think about the long-term infrastructure costs, because as I spoke about a little bit earlier, our tax dollars can only go so far. Individuals have expressed a lot of frustration sometimes when we have seen different initiatives come to the ballot box asking for more tax dollars. And so trying to be as good a steward with the tax dollars that we're given as well, working through what do we look like as we grow together for those infrastructure improvements, for water, for how people move around to get around with transportation needs. Being able to stretch individuals' dollars. The same person that's a City of Fayetteville resident is also a Washington County resident, is also, in Arkansas. And, they're providing their taxpayer funds in all of those areas. There's no reason we can't be partnering in a stronger way to make sure that we stretch those dollars and make the most efficient spend possible for those taxpayers.
Do you feel like Fayetteville can address this housing crisis on its own? I'm really curious, where the rubber kind of meets the road between city, county, cities that appear to be proactive in their approach, or at least more formalized in their approach, versus other cities in our area that maybe aren't thinking about it in the same way. And I'm not asking you to speak for the region, but where the rubber meets the road, how can we as a community think about this in a way that brings maybe a more unified position to how this is going to be approached or solved?
Well, Fayetteville definitely can't solve this all on their own by any means. We can be a large part of the solution. I really think that we can be a leader in trying new things. I think that we can be a proving ground and a pilot and a testing ground for some unique solutions. And so I'm looking forward to what that can look like. No, we definitely have to be working in concert with our county partners at the state level as well. There's been, going back to speaking about, historically things that have been in place, and, housing has not been front and center as far as legislative priorities and budgetary for quite some time. And so we're seeing those decades-long lack of investments in these particular areas that are from federal and state policies that have had impacts to our communities. But also, I think it is incredibly important that we are speaking together as a region in our planning. I'm seeing more of that effort that's happening where there's more meeting together and speaking together. Really, it's how do we accelerate that, and how do we each bring our unique perspectives into place, ultimately centering that we all probably can hold hands on core values. What do we hold in common around quality of life? Things like, wanting to make sure that all of our community members can have prosperity. And, what does that look like? And, that should look like ease of access and being able to get an affordable rental, to purchase a home if that's what your pathway desires. And those things like transportation and infrastructure. And how does that get facilitated? That's probably the big question mark. Is we're all going in so many different directions. We're all so incredibly busy. And, no one wants to attend one more meeting, right? I've said this before, is, we've done a lot of talking. And I think, really for me, I'm ready for action. And so how do we get to those actionable steps? How do we find alignment on those shorter term things that we can get processed together, those midterm and long term? And again, I want to continue to applaud, the folks that are out there that are convening together groups and are having those public discussions. The more the community too is able to be at that table and be a part of those conversations, we continue to hear that from voters, that voters really have a high desire that we have better collaboration. What does that look like? I guess stay tuned. But I have a lot of hope about what that can look like for the future. And us working together, I think, is a part of that.
I want to go back to some of the things you'd mentioned around the work you're doing with Arkansas Justice Reform, and that it feels to me that you live at the intersection between this idea of housing instability, wealth, and poverty, and the impact of what poverty does within our criminal justice system. How do these worlds meet? How do they come together?
I mean, they live together all the time because they're a part of all of the ecosystem that we all live in. We are, in one way or the other, going to be addressing and solving for and paying for every person within our community in one way or the other. It all has to do with how we determine how we're going to do that. And for me, again, going back with my background being in data analytics, when I look at the evidence behind and the data behind how we currently approach statewide in Arkansas and even in our region, individuals struggling with poverty or some of these other unmet needs, there's just tremendous upward opportunity in how we meet folks. People, in poverty, unfortunately, have a higher propensity to end up in the criminal legal system, to face arrest, to face mounting fines and fees that they can't pay within our court system. And so there's just a continuing cycle of part of our population that struggles to have full opportunity within our communities. And when I think about some of the metrics I've even looked at the city of Fayetteville, some people in our community are doing great. They're excelling. But what the pandemic did for us was really kind of laid bare and widened a lot of gaps of disparities too that were existing in our community. Things like in the city of Fayetteville, unfortunately, we're experiencing 20% poverty. That's 1 in 5 people. So as you go through a shopping center or parking lot, every 5th person you count is in poverty in our community. Are we okay with that? Because the policies and the way we are budgeting today is ultimately giving us that outcome. And are we all right with that? For me, the answer is no. And I think directly the types of things that we can do as elected leaders across our region around housing, around the possibility of economic opportunities for individuals to move upward or to meet this increased need around public health. Public health is public safety. We have less resources for things around our mental health and recovery services today than we did before the pandemic began. And I just told you that those needs have actually increased since the pandemic. And so those, in my viewpoint, are definitely opportunities because we're meeting that need in some way, but maybe in an inappropriate way, not meeting that individual best, not meeting that family best. And it ends up costing us a lot more money in the long run. We have at any time in the Washington County Detention Center down in South Fayetteville, 100 individuals that have listed themselves as either unhoused or the Seven Hills address. Those 100 individuals, it cost about $97 a day. That's over $30,000 a year to house those individuals in the Washington County Detention Center. We all pay for that. And so it's really thinking about, again, what policies, what changes, if those individuals potentially even just had stable housing, do they exit out of our system? There is evidence out there that shows that just providing that permanent supportive housing need has the ability to permanently exit those individuals out of those types of interactions. And then they end up being able to seek out the additional care that they miss out on and increasing the frequency of attending ongoing like mental health appointments and other services that they struggle to be able to do whenever they're not housed. And so, again, our policies, where we spend our budgets, what we invest in our communities, the whole, I think you mentioned, build community, not jails. Really building our communities for me is, again, where we spend our budgets, where we invest, what resources exist in our community to strengthen our community so that we have true public safety.
Yeah, I think number one, build community and not jails obviously comes from your organization. And to me, on the surface, it feels like those two things, the way we approach these, maybe city by city or region, regionally, that we deal with these two things as separate conversations. But they're not separate conversations. These are, as you just explained, these are tied at the core. And I think from a general public perspective, it feels like, and that's my quantifiable statistical feeling, I guess, if you will. But how do we as a community not allow these things to live in separate buckets, right? What as members of the community, what can be asked of everyone to be able to try to step back a little bit and understand really the roots and the core of how these two issues of housing or poverty and crime and the impact to the systems and the way things where we spend our money. Sometimes it just doesn't feel like we're having a very intelligent conversation as a community, if I'm honest.
No, I mean, I appreciate that viewpoint. That's probably back in 2019 where I found myself. I felt like I was a pretty educated person, felt halfway intelligent. I'd done a lot of complicated things in my corporate environment and responsibility. And I think that I was really gobsmacked to look at and see that so often across these community or government functions, that things were so siloed, even though they are so intertwined, they have direct impact on one another. And that's a hard ask to say for the general public at large. I want to really identify that we are busy people, that I know that you have people that are going to hear this that are barely keeping it together, that have struggling family members, that have kids that, maybe barely trying to get through school, right? Get through summer. Now what am I going to do with my kids during the summer? And so we're asking for people to do one more thing. And I think that can feel really hard. So I think that there is a tremendous opportunity for those in our region in elected office, government entities, but also, the community at large to have these deeper, broader conversations about the impacts we really do have across all these siloed areas. We also have to be okay to say, just because we've done it one way doesn't mean that we have to keep doing it that way. And that can be a really hard conversation. It can be really bristly because we are talking about budgets. We are talking about, when we talk about budgets, these are tied to jobs. These are people in our community that we care about, right? But if we really are saying, and going back to that, getting aligned, and everyone in our community wants to make sure that we're all thriving, that we all have prosperity, that's what I think is imperative, is that we're going to have to do a little bit of work to look at and recognize the interaction. And that will look different for each of us. It might just be, you might need to subscribe to one more email, unfortunately, right? And read a different perspective. For me, I try to prescribe to so many different ways that individuals look at. I have a wide range of things that I have coming to my inbox that I try to make time to read. And so you can hear different perspectives. Also, and I nerd out on these types of things, so not everybody's going to enjoy that. But, there are incredible research and publications that are out there on all these incredible solutions that have been happening in different parts of the country. They're exciting because they really help to restore people. They really help to create a better impact on the spend that's happening in that community. They're able to save money, right? We all want to save money. Mm-hmm. And so I wish there was a simple answer. I think that's the thing at hand, is that there's no magic wand, but no one's coming to save us either, right? And we're here in our communities. I feel so encouraged because even when I disagree with individuals, even on my own council, I do see that there's the care. I do see that there is a desire to solve for making sure there's livability and quality of life in our communities. And I really think it's the hard answer, really, of, we're all going to have to just unfortunately do a little more work. It's sitting in more conversations together where there might be lack of alignment, there might be some disagreement. But the conversations that I've been fortunate to have over the last 5 years, doing a lot of work during the pandemic, where they got bristly, where they got uncomfortable, I've actually had the most growth for myself personally. My viewpoints changed more in a bigger way. And so I guess that's probably my charge would be if somebody's listening to this is like just stepping into that space, into a place that maybe you haven't been before, but also to really challenge the rest of us that are in the region too, that are in these positions that we have opportunity to be able to hold that space and hold that time to think about these things in a different way, where they do have this interaction across these silos. And it's up to us to not allow them to continue to be looked at in that way too. And so that's kind of the challenge back to us as well. And so I wish I had an easy button to answer that question, but I do recognize and I hear that it's hard. It's us doing something different than we've been doing, but I think we're worth it. And the reason I do it is because I have an 8 and a 12-year-old that I have a huge responsibility for, and this world isn't working exactly the way that it needs to for them and won't meet them in the way that they necessarily need it to meet them as they become adults.
Thank you. I feel like I just need to be quiet and let you talk because I think that helps give a perspective that has been lacking from a lot of the conversations that I've seen in the region around when we think about challenges of growth and housing, that it is this tipping point in many ways, that the decisions made there are going to impact things throughout the rest of the system, and how we ask people to lean in to try to understand these issues is hard. As we look towards kind of the next 20 years, what needs to happen to make sure that when we welcome another 400,000 people, that we've done that in a way that moves us towards this space where these issues can be dealt with in a very holistic way?
That's an easy question you just gave me, Fred. I appreciate that easy question.
That's the root of what I would hope to understand, but maybe that's not the reality of the questions that we, should be contemplating. Like, how do we get there?
Yeah, no, I wish I had my back pocket the full roadmap, right? I think it's some of the things that you asked in some of your questions is, it's going to be so incredibly important that we do work collaboratively. It's going to be important that we find where we have alignment and misalignment, and then determine whether or not we need to do a little more work to get more full alignment before we proceed. But it is on, are we all holding hands on the type of zoning and land use we want to use? Are we holding hands on the conservation measures? We value green space in the city of Fayetteville. We have an enduring green network. We have incredible measures that we are putting in our comprehensive plan around sustainability and, carbon footprint and climate change. Are we aligned across the region on those things? Question mark. And for where we go in the next 20 years, that's the thing that keeps me up at night. That's the thing that keeps me just hustling and running as fast as I can. But really, it is around how we plan all of this growth that's coming. It's coming whether we want to acknowledge it. I know that I feel and commiserate some with individuals who want our region to stay the same as it was 20 years ago. But it's not. It's not the same region it was 5 years ago. It's not the same region it was 2 years ago. It just really is in and I guess it's always been in flux and it's always been changing. I think it's important to center the region's culture too, the region's, what makes it that thing that you can't quite put your finger on, but it's the reason people are coming here. Yes, some you can put your finger on. Some there's
Right.
opportunity financially with jobs. But really, I meet people who come with $20 in their pocket and no plan. They see hope and they see opportunity in this region. And, how do we bring in those folks that come with immediate job prospects, or they are, transferred here because of a job opportunity, but also that person that comes in on the Greyhound bus. And, that 20-year plan, or what we look like in 20 years, our policies, how we work together as a region and our cities really has to encompass meeting each individual and family where they're at, how they come to our region, and to meet those aspirations too that they bring with them when they express, a desire to end up in whatever next phase of their life or next stage that they desire, that there is a clear pathway for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that goes back to, it's not one silver bullet solution. I think we have to be doing all the things. It's making sure that there's entrepreneurial programs, it's, job training, it's education pathways. It's also, we have to make sure that we're addressing that climate changes here, and that, our region is going to have fluctuations of what our climate is doing. And so what are our resiliency plans? Because typically those areas that see more flooding or more impact from drought or have less green space are more economically depressed. But that doesn't have to be the way that we path forward. We have an opportunity today with our land use plans, with zoning, with many of the policy decisions that we're making to change that. And then I want to make sure that I don't not link transportation in. For so many in our region, and I'll say even my own family, a $500 to $700 a month outlay for transportation is not feasible for so many. But also, do we really want all of those automobiles? We hear about traffic already. Every place you are in our entire region, you're going to hear about parking and about traffic. And so, again, going back to not siloing these decisions, but we have to find the ways to create these alternative transportation networks because they are more climate resilient. They enable more individuals to have autonomy and choice and ability to move themselves through the community to get their basic needs met, to be able to be a part of employment opportunities, education opportunities, and, hoping that we can work regionally about the types of planning that we have that's not just roadways. Roadways will have to always be a part of that, and I'm not naive in that, but there is a tremendous opportunity for us to, again, just be a leader in this region. We have incredible trail networks, but it's not just trails for leisure. How do we move individuals in alternative ways through our communities is going to be incredibly important for creating prosperity for everyone.
Okay. I mean, when we think about conversations that have been in the media recently around jail expansion and how county deals with that need, I think what I hear from you, though, is a reframing of that, is that there are things that we can be doing that don't require jail expansion, there are things we can be doing to prevent people from flowing into these systems already. And I think that's the work that you've dedicated all of your days in your life to. Help me understand how those two connection points can be thought about differently.
No, absolutely. So kind of going back to when I really stepped into this conversation in 2019, again, I thought that I was quite, educated on things, but when you really look at the landscape of who ends up in arrest and incarceration in our judicial system, so oftentimes, it is individuals that have just tremendous unmet need around mental health, the need for recovery and addiction services, unmet trauma, being victims of crime at different times, or, from a young age, possibly experiencing a tremendous amount of trauma and ending up in these different systems. And again, you don't have to recreate anything because there are tools in place in other areas. We were lucky in Northwest Arkansas. The Quorum Court spent some funds several years ago and had the National Center for State Courts look at the entire criminal system. And what they basically said is, if you keep doing what you're doing, you will need to expand. But you have these other ways that you can be looking at how you look at your system and how you hold people accountable. There's something from the Department of Justice called the Jail Planning Standards Guide, and it says you will fill every jail bed that you have. As an elected person now that's responsible for a budget, that's pretty mind-blowing to say I could give them, another 1,000, 2,000 beds, and they said we'll fill them. So it's all based on policy decisions. It's all based on how we utilize the resources that we have. And for me, it's so compelling when I look at the intersection of what the evidence and the data says around these things, like, for instance, pretrial services. We've spoken about the immense poverty that exists in the state. That's no different in our region, that people are struggling, that they don't have $100 for one incident that comes unexpectedly. If their car breaks down or their kid falls and breaks their arm, they don't have $100 for that incidental. So when someone faces arrest, in our jail systems, almost the majority population is in there because they are just too poor to buy their freedom. A judge has seen them and said, you're safe as long as you post this amount of money. And oftentimes, if people don't know what the bail system is, you have to post 10% with a bonds person to be able to get released. And if you look at the statistics of who ends up in our facilities, it doesn't matter if you're in on $2,500, where you'd have to come up with $250, or $50,000, which is $5,000. You still trap the same amount of individuals in our facilities. We know that even a couple of days in a jail facility means the destabilization of families. People lose their jobs, they lose their housing, they lose their children into DHS care. And in our region, kids that are pulled from their homes with DHS, they don't stay in the region. They actually get moved out of our region, end up very far away. And so this has tremendous trauma and impacts to those individuals and to our community when those folks become even less stabilized. They're coming back to our community at some point. Most people that end up in our local jails do not go to prison, and they oftentimes are on supervision or have different fines and fees that they end up facing. And really looking at these other alternatives, things like pretrial services, it's an investment that we make that's not something where we're just putting someone in the jail. It actually has someone who wraps services around the individual to make sure, at the end of the day, the judge just wants to make sure that folks are being held accountable, that they're making it through the entire court process. And so they get court reminders. If they need rides to be able to get to see their attorney, they have that assisted. If they need childcare, it helps with education opportunities. So alternatives to incarceration are working in other areas like Lawrence, Kansas, and different other places around the nation. And so those types of approaches are things that we can look at. We have something called the Crisis Stabilization Unit that was authorized by Governor Hutchison that was looking at an alternative. Instead of putting individuals in mental health crisis into our local jail facilities, we put them into an appropriate level of care to get health care for their mental health need. And so there are these types of opportunities to use less money. Usually these are cost effective, and they're typically cost savings to incarceration that actually has the ability to give us greater public safety and exit individuals out of these systems that oftentimes they stay going in and out. At any time, someone in the Washington County Detention Center has gone through that facility 7+ times. And so what we're doing is not working. And so most of us who especially have to keep a P&L, who are doing quotas or budgets, if we have a program in place and we're investing, just ongoing funds and it's not working, we'd probably get shaken. And that might mean that we'd lose our elected office but unfortunately, we have stayed in autopilot on some of these things in our state and in our region. And myself, our organization, Arkansas Justice Reform Coalition, and many people who've been directly impacted and their families are saying, we really want to see these investments in these areas that historically have not been invested in, so that we can see a change and that more of these individuals and families can thrive and be prosperous in our community whenever their needs are met.
Thank you. I think that's super helpful in trying to understand how these worlds come together and how we make decisions around the priorities of where we spend our time and resources as a community. And so thank you for walking through that. It's super, super helpful. I'll kind of asked everyone this question that I've had the chance to speak with. And it's really this question of, what do you fear for this place?
I mean, what made me run for office is I fear that Fayetteville won't have a place for my daughters, that they have lived in Fayetteville their entire lives. They were born here, they've been raised here, and in their minds, they think there's a place for them. And my greatest fear is that there's not a place for them. There's not a place for some of their classmates and friends. And so that keeps me awake at night. That also, though, keeps me very motivated because I feel really responsible to them, to their classmates. But yeah, that's probably my greatest fear. But I'm not going to, I guess, I don't think that we do our greatest work when we come from a place of fear. I really come more from a hopeful perspective because, again, I've been just really fortunate to be allowed into some very intimate spaces. People have shared their, very vulnerable stories. And I've lived some of that myself. And so I see that our community is continuing to show up in a way that they want to find other solutions. They want to find other pathways. And so I'm hopeful just from that. And so I think that that's probably what motivates me the most. But yeah, I do. I don't want our region to become exclusive. I don't want our region to become gatekept, that only certain folks have the privilege to be here. I do think it should be a place for everyone. I was so incredibly lucky because I looked at Fayetteville as a place of hope when I came in the 90s. I told my story from poverty and my mom actually going on and becoming a college graduate, watching her with so much determination, but really struggling and never wanting to have to struggle. And I've been so fortunate as an adult that I never have had to. But I sought out this region as that place to seek opportunity, and it met me and it answered that. And I want that to be a pathway for other people and my children as well.
Thank you. I think you've moved towards this kind of final question. Is we use this term wholeness, community wholeness in the conversations, and I think I'm curious when I say that. What does that trigger, or what do you feel like it looks like? What does wholeness look like for you in the space that you're in today?
Community wholeness for me, probably arrived at it in the work that I've done the last several years, but some of the conversations we've had at council to really put verbiage to it is probably, quality of life. Wholeness is having choice over your person. We've seen that challenge so much in recent years. And wholeness for me, for people in our region, is that they have ability of choice. And it's not just, I hear people say people made that choice. If you had 2,000 available choices in your portfolio of options, but they had narrowed down to, 5, did they really have a choice? I'm really saying, the really widening the possible net of opportunity to me creates that whole community so that we each get to participate at very similar levels. And while, we may not be able to have that ideal of all of us having that full equity, working and striving towards that as much as possible for every individual that wants to call this place home.
Thank you. I think that's beautiful. Councilmember Moore, thank you for sharing the table with me. Thank you for creating some space to talk into what it looks like to form and shape this place. And thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you to Councilmember Moore for her time to sit with me and help unpack part of our community building process that we don't often understand how it's fully connected. I do want to be clear, the law should be enforced and people need to be held accountable for their actions. Councilmember Moore also agrees with that. However, we are not limited and cannot be limited to a linear way of thinking that the only way to address crime is through our jail systems. If there are ways to prevent people from entering those systems in the first place, or ways to exit people from those systems permanently, I think it's in our best interest as a community to invest in those options. And hear me, invest in those options even if we fail and have to try another way. We see great evidence of leaders in our community working through and finding solutions to very difficult problems. And just like affordable housing challenges, there are solutions. Yes, they may be difficult, but there are solutions that we can find for the benefit of our neighbors and for the benefit of our community financially. And that is why I'm incredibly thankful to have leaders like Councilmember Moore doing what she is doing, asking very difficult questions, but finding a better way forward. And for now, my ask is this: spend a little time digging into the issues about how Washington County is trying to allocate these COVID funds for jails and ask the hard questions. Is this the best we can do? If it's not, please call your elected leaders and voice your concerns. And for our next episode, we have a chance to talk with Jake Newell. Jake is the CEO and founder of Newell Development. We've talked a lot about affordable housing and its domino effect into so many other areas of shaping our community. But we have yet to hear directly from a developer who is actually making the decisions and investments into building housing, affordable or otherwise.
If we don't handle this locally amongst the big cities in Northwest Arkansas, my fear is the growth goes just extreme. It just goes way west, and we have major transportation issues, and we have people living way far away from quality of life amenities that now not everyone can enjoy them. I think that ultimately we don't provide the supply. What will happen is big outside groups will come in and they'll build whatever they want, and they might not build it in our city. They might build it just west of our city, but they'll build whatever they want, and they'll build it at mass scale. And maybe it's not built in a way that really builds our culture and community long term.
And so I look forward to sharing this conversation with you. Jake's perspective is really important, and I think it's going to help us see a full picture. And to close today, I'm coming back to Arkansas-born Johnny Cash and what is believed to be one of the last songs that Johnny Cash wrote before his death. When the Man Comes Around brings a message of judgment, but it also seems to beg the question of who is unjust and who is righteous. And if you're on Spotify, you'll roll right into it. And if not, check out the episode webpage for links to the music. And as always, I'm incredibly grateful and humbled that you would follow along. And I want to say thank you for being a part of the shaping of this place.